Good evening, everyone. My name is Jeffrey Donfeld. I have been asked to make some introductions, but first I want you to know why I'm here. I served for 4.5 years on the President's White House staff. I want to thank the Nixon Foundation for putting on this event. This is just an extraordinary turnout, and I really truly believe that you're all going to walk away from this saying, am I glad I attended? When I was asked to make a presentation about my relationship with the Nixon family, I said under one condition, and that is that I want to talk about and hopefully dispel the notion that Richard Nixon was anti-Semitic. And I'm going to do that by telling 3 stories, one of which everyone is aware of, but 2 of which no one is aware of in this room other than my wife of 42 years. I came to the Nixon White House as a result of having clerked for the Nixon, Mudge, Rose, Guthrie, Alexander, and Mitchell law firm in New York between my 2nd and 3rd years of law school, which was 1967. At that time, I was introduced to Tricia Nixon. We started dating. As a result of that, in 1967, Tricia asked me to escort her to the International Debutante Ball. I was a poor Jewish kid from the west side of Los Angeles. I didn't have very much money. And I told her I couldn't afford to stay in a hotel. She said, no problem. You're going to stay with us at my parents' co-op apartment in New York, which I did. I ate meals with the Nixons. They took me out to dinner. I never experienced one single solitary element of anti-Semitism, and believe me, they knew I was Jewish. I didn't have a tuxedo. At that time, I probably didn't even know what a tuxedo was. I wore President Nixon's tails and shoes, perfect match, to the International Debutante Ball in 1967. I doubt very much that the anti-Semite that the press wants to make him appear to be could have been had he done what I've just explained to you. I'm going to tell you one other story out of sequence. In 1972, I attended for Yom Kippur, the Jewish high holiday, the largest conservative synagogue in Washington, D.C. Yitzhak Rabin, who was then the Israeli ambassador to the United States, attended that synagogue. For the break, after the holiday was over, several men were invited to the rabbi's home and were escorted into the rabbi's study. We were able to ask Ambassador Rabin questions, and I said, Mr. Ambassador, of the potential candidates for President of the United States, who, in your judgment, if elected, would best guard the self-interest of the State of Israel? He hesitated, and then he said, you know, although I believe that Hubert Humphrey would have the greatest feeling for the State of Israel, in my judgment, Richard Nixon would best protect the interests of the State of Israel because he understands the nature of communism. I would urge all of you today to substitute for the Soviet Union and the Arab bloc with the nation of Iran today and compare the existential threats in 1972 and 1973 with what the State of Israel is facing today, and think about which anti-Semite you would like to be in the White House today. I know where my vote would be. I left Washington in October of 1973. I drove across country, came to Los Angeles. I was to start a job at a law firm, and my sister and brother-in-law were about to leave for Israel. And they said, why don't you come with us? I said, I can't do that. I'm about to start a new job. And they said, you don't have a wife, you don't have a mortgage, you don't have children, come with us. I said, okay. Long story short, I landed in Israel the day before the Yom Kippur War broke out. I attended synagogue with my brother-in-law in Jerusalem, and at the noon break, we walked outside, sirens went off, a woman ran out on a balcony, and she yelled, Milchama, Milchama. For those of you who don't know Hebrew, Milchama means war, war. I stayed in Israel and was staying one evening at an apartment of a friend that I went to grade school with in Los Angeles in a town called Rishon LeZion. Literally, no one in the entire world knew where I was. In the middle of the night, the telephone rings. Now, I don't speak Hebrew. For some reason, I jumped out of bed, I picked up the telephone, I said, hello, and on the other end, this is the White House operator, we're looking for Mr. Donfeld. I said, what? My to-be wife, now of 42 years, was on the other end of the telephone as a result of my closest friend in Washington, Rob Odle, who's general counsel to the foundation, imposed upon the White House operators to find me. These people are really a legend in their own time. She was crying and said, you got to promise me to get on a plane tomorrow and come home. The State Department says Israel's losing the war. I said, I can't do that. I want to see if there's anything that I can do to help. I was really foolish at that time. I go back to bed, and in the middle of the night, a series of sirens goes off. I rush into my friend's bedroom. I said, Uri, is this the real thing? And he's sitting like this. Another series of sirens goes off. He says, yep, it is. I grab one of his babies. He grabs the other baby. I put the passport in my jeans and go down to the bomb shelter underneath the apartment building, and I look outside at the dark night, and I said, you moron, you're never going to see daylight again. I mean, all I can envision was this apartment building coming down. Thank God nothing happened. I traveled throughout Israel during the war, in between military convoys. I went to a city called Safat, a holy city. I watched the Israeli planes bomb the Golan Heights, and sitting in this hotel having lunch, an IDF soldier came in with a blackened face, and we invited him to our table and said, what happened? And he said, well, my tank was blown up, all of my buddies were killed. I grabbed my Uzi, I ran over to the Syrian tank, and I killed everyone in the tank. And I'm sitting there saying to myself, this is like a Disneyland movie, I don't believe this. We returned to Jerusalem, and I see on the front page of the newspaper this fellow, this young soldier's face, and the same story. Whenever I tried to volunteer somewhere at a hospital to help, the Israelis said, you're just going to get in our way, stay away. I was in Tel Aviv, and I watched the American military airlift bringing in military supplies for Israel. But for the actions of Richard Nixon, as allowing the military supplies coming into the state of Israel, when he said to Secretary Kissinger, 3 planes? How many planes do we have? I want them all in the air. And I said to Consul General Siegel at dinner tonight, I said, but for Richard Nixon, you, my friend, would not be sitting here, and I probably would not be sitting here either. As Jews would say, President Nixon saved Israel's tochus. I take it you all know what a tochus is. One more story. When I watched those planes come in, I wrote the president a letter saying how proud I was to have served in his administration and how grateful I was for what he did for the state of Israel. I want to read you a letter that he sent to me in response. It's dated December 3rd, 1973. Dear Jeff, before another day passes, I want to thank you for your recent letter concerning the situation in the Middle East. It was good of you to write and let me know of your own views as a result of your visit to Israel. I am sure you know we have devoted a great deal of time and effort to the Middle East in recent weeks. By now, you are generally familiar with the steps this government has taken to aid Israel in line with our long-standing commitment to its security and well-being, and to assist in the diplomatic process towards helping secure a just and durable peace in the area. Though the process promises to be complex, we are committed to remaining creatively engaged in all efforts to achieve that final peace. As we have long known, unrest in the Middle East has a profound effect on all of us. I am confident of this nation's understanding and resolve to carry out our commitments and at the same time actively pursue the cause of peace. Your assurance of dedicated, staunch support and continued strong efforts in our behalf are exactly what we have come to expect of you, but I am nevertheless deeply grateful. With personal regards, sincerely, Richard Nixon. Until yesterday, I was not aware of a wonderful video which you are about to see. It's a video of the first visit of a United States president to the country of Israel.
It is for me, as I'm sure all of you can imagine, a very great moment to be standing here, as the President has indicated, as the first president to be here in Israel. And particularly so because our two countries have been joined together in friendship from the time of Israel's birth as a nation in our modern times. We have been through over these years some difficult times. During the period that I have served as President of the United States, we have been through some difficult times together. And I can only say that the friendship that we have for this nation, the respect and the admiration we have for the people of this nation, their courage, their tenacity, their firmness in the face of very great odds, is one that makes us proud to stand with Israel as we have in the past in times of trouble, and now to work with Israel in a better time, a time that we trust will be a time of peace.
It is now my pleasure to introduce two very, very fine gentlemen. Larry Elder is a lawyer, columnist, nationally syndicated radio talk show host, and author of several New York Times bestsellers, including The 10 Things You Can't Say in America. He's known to his loyal and vast following of Eldorados as Sage of South Central, and last month, Larry became a recipient of the star on Hollywood's Walk of Fame. It is also my pleasure to introduce to you Consul General David Siegel. Consul General Siegel assumed his current diplomatic mission in 2011, serving as the most senior representative of Israel in the southwestern United States. Most recently, Mr. Siegel served as Chief of Staff to Israel's Deputy Foreign Minister. In this role, he was deeply involved in policy formation and decision-making at the senior levels of Israel's foreign policy establishment. Previously, he served as Chief of Staff to 3 of Israel's ambassadors to the United States, Counselor for Congressional Affairs, and Embassy Spokesman. In these respective positions, he was Israel's principal liaison to the White House, State Department, Congress, and the District of Columbia Press Corps, for which I offer him my greatest sympathy. Gentlemen, please come.
Thank you. That was great. Nice job.
fans here.
Couple, yeah. Thank you all for coming. Appreciate it. David, let's get right to it.
Okay.
How likely is it that the international community will soon, someday, face a nuclear-armed Iran?
Well, unfortunately, we're very close. And this is not a development that is good for the Middle East. It's certainly not good for Israel. It's not good for the United States or the world. Iran, as we've heard tonight, and I'm assuming we'll hear more about, is a country that is an enemy of the United States. It's an enemy of Israel. While it's quote-unquote negotiating with the West, it's conducting military marches last few weekends, calling death to America, death to Israel, blowing up mock US destroyers and so on. But this isn't just theatrics. They are all over the Middle East. We'll talk about it tonight. The Middle East is a place that is an ongoing warfare. Right now, thank goodness, it's not involving Israel directly. But the war in Yemen, it may seem like a sideshow, but it's a war about the future of the Middle East between the forces behind Saudi Arabia and the forces behind Iran. So to have Iran go nuclear in this context or in any context, a country that calls for Israel's destruction, that has terrorist armies on our borders, on 3 borders of Israel right now, that denies the Holocaust, that has international cartoon contests of Holocaust denial as we speak. You know, we commemorate Holocaust Day, they're doing that. To have a country like this, that is also the #1 sponsor of terrorism in the world, with an ICBM program that is covering most of Europe and it's on the way to a theater near you, to have a country like this go nuclear is insanity. So it's something that we don't want to see.
David, given all the things you've said about Iran, given the threat that Iran poses, given the fact that the Ayatollah has said repeatedly that death to Israel and someday, God willing, there'll be no America, why has the world in general, and Israel in particular, allowed Iran to get this close to getting a nuclear bomb?
Well, this has been a cat and mouse game for a quarter century, and a deadly game. Iran has engaged in subterfuge, in deception, in lying to the world. Somehow we find out that they have underground facilities that no one knew about. There are places where the inspectors cannot go in. So we've been trying to delay the Iranian nuclear program as much as we could. And in recent years, we were very successful. We had the economic sanctions on the table that gathered momentum to such an extent that it really, got the Iranians' attention because it was causing significant damage to their economy. And they came to the negotiating table. And the problem that we see now is that this deal that is on the table is a deal that will pave their way to a bomb. It's simply not robust enough to stop them. And this is where we've expressed, as you know, we've had a thing or two to say about this. We've expressed very, very, very grave concerns about what's happening.
David, how can the two sides disagree so much already on this so-called framework? According to Kerry, the sanctions are going to be removed slowly as confidence builders. According to the Iranians, they're going to be removed right away. According to John Kerry, there'll be no notice inspections. According to the Iranians, they're going to get notice for inspections. According to John Kerry, they're going to roll back certain facilities. According to the Iranians, they're rolling back nothing. How can both sides have a deal and yet two people have this kind of divergent interpretation of the same deal?
Well, you have all of these voices out there, and then you also have the information that we hold by talking to all the partners and players about what the prospects are. And again, there's nothing signed, and it gives us the time and the space to persuade and to engage in very robust diplomacy, not just with the United States, but with our other allies that are involved in these negotiations, not to let this happen, and certainly not the Iranian version of the results happen. We are very, very concerned that a country like Iran will be allowed to maintain the majority of its operating centrifuges with enough fuel and R&D capacities, with a sunset provision, which means 10 years, all bets are off, that will enable them to be on the cusp of nuclear weapons, if not now, then in a few years from now. And You know, for people that are 4,000 years old, like the people of Israel, 10 years is a moment in time.
You mentioned if not now. The National Intelligence Director, James Clapper, interviewed Charlie Rose a few weeks ago and very calmly stated that the Ayatollah already has the capacity to build a nuclear bomb. It's just a question of whether or not he has the political desire to weaponize. John Kerry said the same thing pretty much. Joe Biden. Don't let anybody fool you, he said. They already have the ability to build a bomb. Is that true?
Well, it's both about capability and it's about political intentions. Political intentions are a product of the way you see the world around you. If Iran believes that history is on its side and that the world is rushing to the economic gates of Iran in order to engage in gas deals and oil deals and automotive deals and so on, then there's no reason for them not to make these political decisions. They see a world catering to Iran rather than the other way around. The paradox here is that oil prices have plummeted, as we know, by a very significant degree. This is their number one foreign currency earner. The leverage should be on our side, on the side of the West, not on the side of Iran. Unfortunately, in these negotiations, the leverage has been on Iran's side. So we believe that they have the capability. They have been deterred all these years, but we're very concerned about a prospect in which the sanctions are removed, and we do see them coming apart as we speak, that there's no sanctions and no pressure, and then they're left to their own devices.
Where did we go from 2008 when every presidential candidate, Republican or Democrat, said that a nuclear-armed Iran was unacceptable, to the head of our intelligence service saying basically that Iran has the capability? What happened between 2008 and now?
Well, I mean, there's been a whole series of calculations that, I'm not going to go into. It's not my government. It's here in the United States and in other countries in the West. I can tell you that Israel's position has not changed. We see Iran as deadly dangerous. We could talk tonight about the various fronts in the Middle East that Iran is engaged in. If I look to northern Israel right now, I see a force called Hezbollah, which is a creation of Iran. And they are sitting facing Israel with 120,000 rockets and missiles. That is more than Russia has. And the capabilities of, at a moment's notice, turning the Middle East into a war zone. And this is something that we should be very, very concerned about. This is the situation. We haven't changed our perception of the Iranian threat. Others may have, and this is, again, where the very significant disagreement has taken place.
It sounds to me like this is a criticism of the Obama administration, that the Obama administration has taken its eye off the ball and allowed Iran to get closer to getting a nuclear bomb. Is that what you're telling us?
Well, I'm saying that we have, first of all, there's a lot to be said about the U.S.-Israel relationship that goes beyond the Iranian issue. We are very strong allies. We're strategic allies. There is much that we share in common, both in our values and our interests. But on this issue, we have a very, very significant disagreement.
Mm-hmm. When the president of Egypt fell, Mubarak, a lot of people assume that the treaty that's been enforced between Egypt and Israel might be ignored by the new regime. Why hasn't the military leadership in Egypt ignored the treaty that's been so controversial as far as Egyptians are concerned?
Well, the Egyptian government, it's been 4 or 5 years of this Arab Spring, so-called, and Egypt has gone through the Mubarak regime, and then the Muslim Brotherhood regime, and now the military regime. This regime is the best that we have. They are out there fighting terrorism like no one before them. They see the Middle East more or less the way we see the Middle East. They're threatened by Hamas, they're threatened by Iran, they're threatened by the Muslim Brotherhood and the extremist terrorist groups in the Middle East, and they're fighting them. So we believe that countries like Egypt, Jordan, several other Gulf nations that are facing the same threats today that Israel and the West are facing should be countries that receive support, even though they may not be the ideal democracies now, but this is an historic process. And we have two choices. We either empower those forces of darkness, which are terrorism and Iran and Muslim Brotherhood and ISIS and Al-Qaeda, or we help these regimes through the journey they need to go through as they fight terrorism and try to stabilize their own countries.
At the end of June, I think it is, we're supposed to have this final accord with Iran. If Israel does not like the deal, what will Israel do about it?
Well, we've been very vocal. I think, again, this is not only about Israel. If you look at the Middle East, you'll see many countries that agree with Israel. If you look in this country, you'll see many voices that agree with Israel. We're seeing what's happening in Congress. We'll make our opinion known throughout the process. You cannot allow Iran to have the centrifuges. You cannot allow them to have the missiles and the ICBMs that reach everyone. You cannot allow them to continue terrorism and business as usual as the sanctions are removed. You can't allow them to continue denying the Holocaust, denying 9/11, calling death to America, calling death to Israel with no consequences. These are the things that we believe need to be changed. You can't allow them to continue R&D, research and development on perfecting this engine of nuclear weapons. That has to come to a stop. And we believe that as much of it as possible has to be removed. We've done it before. We just removed the chemical weapons from Syria. If not all of them, then a lot of them. This is the model that we believe we need to pursue when it comes to a dangerous country like Iran. Thank you very much.
David, I saw a recent poll in Great Britain. More Brits have an unfavorable view of Israel than they have of any other country except for North Korea. Explain that.
Well, we're seeing a very complex world environment. We're seeing a rise in anti-Semitism that we haven't seen in 70 years since the Holocaust. Right now, we have a conference on anti-Semitism, a global conference in Israel, and our Prime Minister spoke today in very stark terms about the fact that the resurgence of anti-Semitism in the world is a fact, and it's something that we need to fight, and we need to fight it every day together with the governments of the world, and to fight it especially when it starts from the elites in Europe, and this is part of what we're seeing. You know, look at the Middle East. Israel is a force of stability. Ask your allies in the region quietly, who is the country that is the responsible adult in the region? Who is the country that we can rely on? That is the stable, pro-American democracy that is called Israel. There is so much happening in the world right now. So for the Brits to focus on Israel as a source of threat is ludicrous, because look at what's happening in Syria, a country that really is no more. You've got 200,000, 300,000 people butchered over the last 4 years. Look at the wars that are taking place throughout the Middle East as we speak. And one is feeding into the next, is feeding into the next. They're all connected. And you've got dozens and dozens of actors out getting each other with brutality that we haven't seen in decades. This kind of killing has not been seen in the world for decades. And the focus is on Israel. And when the focus is on Israel, when you have this kind of situation, it's clear to us that there's some ulterior motive which relates to those ancient hatreds that we're so concerned about, that they're resurging now.
If President Obama had not pulled out all the troops out of Iraq, would the Middle East look different right now?
Well, I don't want to get into American policy decisions. I really think it's not my place. There are enough Americans in the room that can do that. I'm here to discuss Israel, and even in our politics, it's complicated enough. But I have to tell you, it's clear that Iran today, with its proxies, and they include the Shiite militias in Iraq, Iran is overtaking the situation in Iraq. It's fighting on the battles of Syria. It may lose, we'll see. It's in Lebanon, it's in Yemen, and it's in other countries in the Middle East. So that the Iranians are probably the preeminent force of instability in the Middle East today, together with their allies. So what you're seeing is a major fight for the future of the Middle East that we need to really become aware of. That countries like Saudi Arabia, that, believe me, they are not perfect, but they are on the right side fighting these dangerous forces that can consume the whole Middle East. And for Israel, these are critical issues. The critical issues, they're on our borders. If you look at Israel's border with Syria, remember how we used to have a UN peacekeeping force there? Do you know where they are now? They're in Tiberias writing reports from deep inside Israel. They're not there anymore. The border isn't controlled by the Syrians anymore. The jihadists have taken over the border. And we have to be Israel. We talked about 1973. We're now in 2015. We have to be very nimble, very smart, very wise, very careful, and very, very strong on our intelligence capabilities to figure out what is happening around us, because it's in constant motion, constant instability and turbulence. And I am and we'll hopefully talk tonight about the good things that are happening in Israel. It is an amazing country that we need to support and protect, and we can do it. And Israel is 67 years old since its rebirth in 1948, and I have no doubt in my mind, Israel will be there for centuries to come. But for that, we need strong friends and strong allies that understand what's at stake. Thank you.
David, why wasn't the recognition of Israel one of the talking points for any kind of deal that we do with Iran?
Well, that's a very good question. This is one of the things that we want to see. You can't come to a country like Iran that is so dangerous and basically say, we are going to remove all our restrictions that we've imposed on you for decades, all of this cumulative effort by the world, and in return for what? For their not agreeing that you will inspect their secret sites, for their not coming clean on all of their deception all these years. I mean, the United Nations, the IAEA, all the inspectors are saying right now that Iran has yet to come clean on any of their secret military activities when it comes to the nuclear weapon issue. So to be in that kind of situation where they're not changing their behavior, they still have their program, they're very dangerous. They're not changing their perspective or their behavior or their rhetoric, to not demand any change. But on the other hand, on the other side of the ledger, to remove all those restrictions, it only means one thing to us. Hezbollah will receive all of those billions of dollars that will be pouring into Iran's coffers, because this is what Iran does. It exports its revolution. This is what it's been doing since the late 1970s, and they continue to do right now.
David, how do you respond to those in the Middle East who say, Israel is a nuclear power, why can't we become a nuclear power? Why is Israel allowed to have a nuke and nobody else in the Middle East allowed to have one?
Well, we've made it very clear that Israel will not be the first country to introduce nuclear weapons in the Middle East. We've also made it clear, and we don't need to because that is well known, that we're not the issue here. We are a representative democracy. In fact, we'll talk about Israel's democracy tonight. It is quite a feat to maintain a democratic structure in the Middle East for 67 years, despite all the challenges around Israel, without a day of non-democracy or without an hour of a threat to our democracy. So Israel's a democratic country, a Western country, and the issue is Iran, the Holocaust denier, the hater of America, the country that is battling now, that is spilling the blood of hundreds of thousands of people in Syria, in Yemen, and in other battlefields in the Middle East. This is a country we don't want to see go nuclear. So again, they'll try to turn the issue and turn it into an Israeli issue. It's not an Israeli issue. This is about you, Iran. What are you doing to your own people? By the way, 70 million people in Iran are held hostage by an Islamist regime that is executing more people than ever before. And the UN is condemning, and no one is paying any attention, and none of this is connected to those talks that are taking place and the lifting of those restrictions on this country.
After Secretary John Kerry announced this framework of a deal, CBS did a news report, and they said on Friday in mosques all throughout Tehran, worshipers were chanting, "Death to Israel." Quote, however, they did it more out of habit than conviction, close quote.
You're in the business.
What's your reaction to that kind of news report? They're doing it out of habit rather than out of conviction.
This is classic rationalizing of your enemy's behavior. When they call for the destruction of Israel, they don't really mean it. We've heard this before. When they do these things, they don't, they don't intend it. You hear a lot of these mantras out there that make absolutely no sense to us and to anyone else in the Middle East. What is really happening in this part of the world, and ladies and gentlemen, the Middle East is not far away. It is very close. There's no leaving the Middle East, because if you go, they will follow you. It's like those cartoons. The Middle East is here to stay. It's 350 million people in all of these countries, and none of them are functioning. And if we want them ever to function again, we've got to remove this shadow that is casted over the Middle East of this Iranian nuclear umbrella with billions of dollars funding terrorism all over the world, including here. If there's a chance for the Middle East, this has to be brought to an end. And we hope to do it diplomatically. We hope to do it through economic pressure. But what we see right now is a trend where the world is going with Iran and will again agree to a deal that for us, they don't even have to violate it, and there'll be a nuclear weapons power.
David, I want you to comment on this BDS movement internationally, boycott, divest, sanction Israel. It particularly is a strong movement here in this country. Do you consider it to be anti-Israel, anti-Jewish?
Well, it's particularly strong in this country, and it's particularly strong in this state. So it's something that we really need to watch very carefully.
Right.
It's a dangerous movement. It is not a movement for peace. If you ask, BDS, for those who don't know, is an acronym for boycott, divest, and sanction one country, Israel. So when you have thousands of Palestinians that are killed by ISIS in the refugee camps in Syria, no one talks about that. No one's even focused on that. When you have hundreds of thousands of people being butchered in the Middle East, no one cares. It's all about one country. It's a hate campaign against Israel. Now, it started as an anti-Israel business, but it's merged and it's morphed into an anti-Jewish business. So if you ask students at UCLA or at Stanford, and you have Jewish students in student government, and they're told you can't do so-and-so because of your religion, in my book, that's anti-Semitism. So it's very hard to distinguish between these folks, and they play this ping-pong game. It's not about the Jews, it's about Israel, and it's not about being anti-Semitic, it's about being opposed to the Likud government or what have you. It's very hard to maintain that differentiation, and very quickly when you check this, you see that this is an anti-Semitic force of hate. Not everyone, but by and large, that's what it's becoming. And it's very, very dangerous. Now, I also happen to believe that we need to take a step back and we look at a campaign. It's a campaign. Take UCLA, it's close. You may have a vote against Israel, you may have terrible things happen in student government, but you have 30,000 kids on campus. They're not all involved in this, they don't even know about this. Mm-hmm. So if we only focus on the threat of BDS, we're missing an opportunity to go to 70–80% of the country that don't even know what all these people are screaming and yelling about, and engage them and build a relationship with them about the future of the U.S.-Israel relationship and why it's important. And it is important. Israel is important to the world. This is why I am proud to represent a tiny country, less than the size of New Jersey, a little bit more than Rhode Island, a little bit less than New Jersey, somewhere in between, that is the number 2 innovator in the world after California in all things that have to do with high-tech, medical devices, the environment, water management. Today, all of California wants to discuss drought-related issues with Israel. Israel's important to the world. It's important to the world. We can't allow this movement of hate on campus to poison the minds of young Jews and young Americans, because at the end of the day, it's in America's interest to have a strong Israel, and it's in Israel's interest to have a strong America, because we're in this together. Thank you.
David, in the waning days of the campaign for Netanyahu's re-election, he said that he was no longer certain about a 2-state solution. I'm sure he said it for political purposes, but he said that. Obama said those words have caused him, Obama, to reassess his relationship with Israel. I mentioned earlier the Ayatollah has recently said, "Death to America." That did not cause Obama to reassess his attitude towards a treaty with Iran.
Larry gets applauses too.
Bit of a contradiction.
Well, let's start it by the order of the question. What did our Prime Minister say? I read it, I reread it, and I reread it again. He was asked a question, given everything that's happening in the Middle East, and ladies and gentlemen, a lot is happening in the Middle East that should concern Israeli decision makers. Iran on 3 borders, Hezbollah covering all of Israel with 120,000 rockets, the Palestinian leadership uninterested in negotiations with Israel. And by the way, when Secretary of State Kerry came with this framework agreement for peace between Israel and the Palestinians, who said yes and who said no? You want to take a guess? Israel didn't like a lot of parts of it, and we were arguing, and it was a sausage-making process, kosher sausage. But our Prime Minister said yes. What did the Palestinians do? They didn't accept Kerry and Ramallah. So, the onus somehow is on Israel. And when our Prime Minister was asked the question, do you think there are prospects for peace right now in the Middle East, given everything that we know, he said, no, I don't. And I think it was an honest answer. It wasn't a policy answer. It was a descriptive answer. Given everything that we see, the Palestinians are not interested in negotiations with Israel despite the best attempts of the American government. They're going to the United Nations. They like to criminalize the process, not negotiate the process. They're going to the International Criminal Court. They're trying to bring Israeli commanders before the world's trials for defending Israel from Hamas rockets. By the way, they're enemies, Palestinian Authority enemies. So this is a game that they're playing. They're not in negotiation, so I think any other sane Israeli would say the same thing. Now that was launched upon as a big issue, but I don't think our Prime Minister, and I think he tried to correct that statement later on in a very honest way and said this is not a policy statement. That was an honest answer to a question.
Mm-hmm. David, how do Israelis feel about the fact that among the groups in America that support Israel, probably the group that supports Israel most fervently are evangelical Republicans, who are often social conservatives, and which puts them at odds with how most Jews in America vote. In Israel, how do you feel about the fact that evangelical Republicans perhaps support Israel more than any other group?
Well, first of all, we appreciate people of faith in this country. We appreciate those who support Israel. I think the support for Israel is much broader than the evangelical movement, although that support is very important for Israel. And by the way, that support isn't secure. There's a lot of things going on in this country that we should be aware of. Our opponents are out there with their own campaigns of hate, not just on campuses, but in churches and in the creative community and wherever they can get a foot through the door. This is what they do. And evidently there's a lot of money out there fueling that. So when I look at the polls, and I look at in-depth polls in this country, I could tell you what we know. 22% of Americans, first of all, the majority in this country support Israel. There's no doubt. And you look at polls from 1948 until 2015, and you see very little difference. Very little difference in the broad support for Israel in this country. But when you go in depth and you really look at what Americans think or don't think about Israel and the Middle East and Palestinians, you see that 22% of Americans support Israel, right or wrong. And that's evangelical, and maybe it's part of the Jewish community and other parts of the community that we all know. 8% oppose Israel, right or wrong. And then there's a great 70% of the country that are really not, again, they don't know that much, they're not that focused on it. And I think it's because we need to change the way we discuss Israel in this country. It's not just about the battles with ISIS out there. We're never going to win that perception war. We need to talk about Israel as a robust democracy, diverse like America. We have Jews from over 100 countries speaking 80 different languages in Israel. And we have 20% of Israel that are not Jewish, that are Arab and they're Christian in Israel. And by and large, those people are patriotic Israelis. They really are. They're not well represented by their elected officials or their appointed political officials. But Israel is a great, diverse democracy in the middle of the most non-democratic region in the world. And Israel is one of the strongest countries on earth, largely thanks to American support. Israel today is the home, as I said, of some of the world's leading innovation. There is a reason why Apple just opened the second largest research and development plant in the world in Israel, with 1,000 engineers and computer technology people. That's Apple. And there's a reason why Google is running around Israel, snapping up startups and opening accelerators and incubators for Israeli technology. There are over 300 global corporations that are not just active in Israel, they have their R&D centers in Israel. GM has an R&D center in Israel. American Automotive is in Israel. American Telephone is in Israel. Cybersecurity, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be the next realm of challenge to all of us, because it's not just our computers, but it's the Internet of Things. It's in your Teslas, and it's in your toaster ovens, and it's in your medical devices, and it's in the hospital rooms, and it's in everything we do. And if it's not protected, we're going to be as we know from Sony, we're going to be in a very bad place. Who is the number one country in the world that is coming up with the ways to protect our financial transactions, our computer services all over? It's Israel. So that there's so much going on in Israel that is important for those 70% of those Americans that are not necessarily thinking about it. And this is where we need to drill down even deeper, and that's what our consulates do. This is what we do. Our office, we cover 7 states, 40 million Americans, 72 members of Congress and Senate, and we talk about Iran, we talk about the Middle East, we try to educate Americans about what is happening, what's at stake, but we also talk about what is Israel. It is not just some pawn on a map of geostrategists. Israel is a very important place for America and for the world. Thank you.
Former President Jimmy Carter, David, once used the word apartheid to describe the treatment of Palestinians in Gaza and in the West Bank. He later on apologized for that, but a lot of people in the so-called BDS movement still accuse Israel of engaging in apartheid tactics. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think it's politicized labeling. They call us frat boys, date rapers. I mean, all these words are out there because this is what galvanized the opposition. When you have a negative campaign, it's very easy to come out with these buzzwords. Israel is the furthest from apartheid than you can possibly imagine. We're the only country that went into Africa and saved black Jews in Africa, brought them to Israel at tremendous upheaval both for us and for them. Very, very difficult to come from the Horn of Africa into a 21st century in a modern democracy like Israel. But we did it. We're very proud of it. Israel's multi-ethnic. The Arabs in Israel are freer than any other Arab in the Middle East. If I'm an Arab mother, I want to have my child in Israel, Muslim mother in Israel, and not in the Middle East. I mean, look what's happening. Would you rather be a Syrian mother or an Israeli Arab mother? And I think the answer is very clear. And I think in the polls, and you look at what they say and what they feel about the country, again, they feel that this is their place and they're proud to be part of Israel. Are there challenges? Of course there are challenges. There are challenges in this country. There are challenges in any democracy. This is why we have civil society organizations. My office, we meet with Latino organizations and African American organizations and Asian American organizations and civil society organizations. Israel has 30,000 organizations that are servicing society because governments don't do it, and maybe they shouldn't do it. So, we're not perfect. We're a democracy. We're multi-ethnic, multi-confessional, but an apartheid, it's far from it. The issue with the Palestinians is a different issue. They are not in a peaceful relationship with Israel. They have sent terrorists our way more than any other society. The suicide bombings that we saw in Israel necessitated that fence. That fence stopped the suicide bombers. It's just a fact, and it made life better for them, and it certainly made life better for us. We will have to, every democracy has to balance the issue of civil rights and the issue of security, and any judge has to weigh different values in society. We do the best that we can to reach that appropriate balance, and believe me, it's no one is challenged more and no one tries harder than Israel. to make it better. Thank you.
David, I told you that I spent part of my junior year in Israel, and I had my 21st birthday there. And I was doing
That was last year.
I was doing a research paper, and I visited the apartment of a professor from Hebrew University who very calmly informed me that that morning his apartment building had had a bomb scare. I was struck by how calmly he said it. I can't imagine coming back to my apartment and being informed by my landlord that there was a bomb scare and being that calm about it. We just had a terror attack in Garland, Texas. Israel has been subject to many, many terror attacks. Is Garland, Texas our new normal?
Well, I think, first of all, the fact is that there is terrorism here, and that there are cells here. We know that Iran was operating here. And how do we know that? Because someone was out to assassinate the Saudi ambassador in a very high-end restaurant in downtown Washington, D.C., just a few years ago. And we all know that restaurant. It's called Cafe Milano. I've had lunch there myself. Many in this room would go there. It's a very good restaurant. It happens to be a place frequented by the ambassadors from the Middle East as well. And the Saudi ambassador was targeted for assassination by Iranian agents that were stopped by an FBI sting operation just a few years ago. And there's a federal indictment about it. Everything is out. It's all well known. If you go to the United Nations, you'll hear the Saudis getting up and screaming at the Iranians for trying to assassinate their ambassador in Washington. So this is all common knowledge. So there is that phenomenon around the world. Thank God in this country, certainly post 9/11, America has organized. You have a very strong law enforcement structure here. Homeland security structure. We do a lot of work together on it, Israel and the United States. By the way, this is an amazing part of our relationship that people don't focus on. The marathon bombings in Boston, that was a mass casualty event. If you remember back to that horrible day, 2-3 years ago, and you remember the doctors talking in the press arrangements there, where each one was talking about how the hospital's organized, they were all crediting an Israeli team that was just there, that trained them to have the hospital ready for mass casualty events. Now, this is happening all over the country. Our firefighters work together. Our police work together. Our airport authorities work together. We have a lot to learn from each other, and unfortunately, Israel has that experience. So I think you have that issue in this country, and you certainly have it in Europe. I mean, God knows we've seen horrible things happen there this year in Copenhagen, in Paris, Jewish targets, press targets attacked by Islamic extremists, and we're going to see more of that, and we have to organize. The United States is in a very good place, certainly compared to your European allies, and Israel's in a very good place. We are very, very well organized. I don't want you to leave tonight feeling that Israel is some war zone. It is not. We are strong. We are secure. We've got issues with our neighborhood. We all know that. But we know how to handle that even when we have those thousands of rockets coming at us. We have something called Iron Dome that takes 90% of them out of the sky. So we've overcome that as well. And the more you overcome, the less they pursue. And this is, I think, the model that we all need to keep in mind.
Gaza is controlled by Hamas, an organization that is committed to the destruction of Israel. The West Bank is under the control of the Palestinian Authority. Abbas supposedly has said he recognizes the right of Israel to exist. I've also heard that he does not recognize the right of Israel to exist as a Jewish state. Has he recognized the right of Israel to exist as a Jewish state?
Oh, no. He doesn't recognize that. He doesn't recognize that Jews are a people. It's only a religion, and therefore shouldn't have any rights of nationality. Jerusalem doesn't belong to the Jews. There was never a holy temple there. The Western Wall is a fiction. I mean, this is what these guys say.
Why then is Mahmoud Abbas perceived to be a moderate leader?
Well, because everything is in comparison, right? We also perceive him as he has a potential of being a moderate leader. How do you define a leader that for the last 10 years has not really, or at least the last 6 years, has not had elections, is staying in power, with very little legitimacy, has missed several rounds of democratic elections that he's not enabled his people to pursue. Let me give you an example. Quite a few years ago, there was a horrible terror attack in Israel. A Jordanian soldier on the border opened fire and killed 7 schoolgirls. And this was a good 18, maybe 15, 18 years ago. The King of Jordan was on his way to Britain, and he was flying his own plane. And when he heard the news, he turned around his plane, he asked for permission, he landed in Israel. The King of Jordan, in all his royalty, paid condolence calls to every single one of the 7 bereaved families. And they happen to live by where I live in Israel, so I know the story very well. He pleaded for forgiveness. He stayed with the families. This is an Arab monarch. And he paid his respects. Abbas is a leader who calls squares after suicide bombers, soccer stadiums after mass killers, and calls streets after known terrorists. So what is the message that he is conveying to his public? Not the message that the King of Jordan conveyed to his. So there are issues here. There are very significant issues here. But Israel, we've learned the hard way that we don't live in Scandinavia. Our neighbors aren't Canada and Mexico. We can't pick and choose. This is the guy that we deal with. We're happy to sit down and negotiate. And we will have a thing to say about his glorification of terrorists as we go through this. But if they're refusing to come to the table, someone has to be held accountable. And we don't accept that Israel will be held accountable for the fact that they have made a strategic decision not to come back to the table. And it's not that the U.S. isn't trying to pursue them to return to the table. It's the more you try, the quicker they run away.
We have, of course, Canada to the north, Mexico to the south. Neither country is sending rockets into America every single night. Is that still going on from Gaza? Is Gaza still sending rockets into Israel almost every night?
Well, the answer is no. They have the capacity of doing that, but they haven't. Last summer, we know that there was a big flare-up, and they fired almost 5,000 rockets into Israel. And every round that they do this, the rockets get more and more significant, and they're now reaching from Gaza all the way up to northern Israel, to Haifa and beyond. We're doing the best we can to prevent them from having that capability next time around. It helps that they're now in a massive fight with Egypt. Egypt is the other neighboring country to Gaza. They don't allow anything in. I was down there a few weeks ago. With my own eyes, I saw the Egyptian tractors taking down those smuggling tunnels, and they just take them down. They've taken down over 1,000 tunnels. They've shut the border completely, so they can't smuggle. And in fact, the only country that is providing Gaza with humanitarian aid is Israel, according to the United Nations. So we try to do, again, the best we can with a very difficult deck of cards. We don't want the population to suffer. We don't want to empower the terrorists. We don't want them to have the capability to manufacture more of these rockets, because they'll fire them sooner or later. In fact, they're split right now, by the way, between the Saudis and the Iranians. The military wing is going with the Iranians. The political wing is going with the Saudis. Who knows what's going to happen with these guys? I mean, they're not even, they can't even reach decisions among themselves. So they're riven within themselves. But there are no rockets on Israel, and when there are, and it's every once in a while, we respond in a very robust way so that they understand that we have a zero tolerance policy for flying fragments over the border.
David, is it true that upon his death, Yasser Arafat had a net worth of something like $500 million? And if that's true, how come that has not undermined the whole leadership of that organization?
Well, the issue of corruption in the Arab world and in the Palestinian political elites is well known. And he did stash away a lot of the resources that his people could have utilized. And I think there's nothing new in that. It's terrible. This is part of the problem with their political structure. You look at Gaza, Israel brings in cement so that people can rebuild their homes, and the cement goes right back to the terrorists so that they can go down and build those tunnels right back into Israel. So we have to be very careful with that. And the issue of corruption is a big problem in Palestinian society. They have an option. because they are Israel's neighbors, and they are the closest to us in the Arab world. They have the option of learning democratic practices, transparent practices. They have that prospect, and we wish them well as long as they're not acting like an enemy. If they act like a neighbor, there is much that we can do. We have high tech, we can help them with high tech. They need water, we can help them with water. We share the environment. We share the underground grids. We can be good neighbors. This is an issue that they're going to have to resolve in their own society. Israel's already made its decision. We will secure ourselves, but we will have our hand outstretched in peace. We did it with Jordan. We did it with Egypt at tremendous cost. We're willing to do it with the Palestinians as well. But when you have a corrupt leadership, that means you don't have legitimacy. That means you're playing with fire. You're afraid of taking risks. You don't want to concede anything. It's very, very difficult to reach a peaceful accommodation under those circumstances.
These are questions from the audience.
Uh-oh.
I have one more, and then I'll go to them. Prime Minister Netanyahu said that of the candidates for president, he prefers Ted Cruz. I was surprised that he made that statement. Was it Cruz he said? I think he said Cruz. I was surprised he made the statement because I felt that it was an injection into American politics that might backfire. Why did he say that? And what is it about Ted Cruz that Netanyahu finds so appealing?
Okay, so this is the first I'm hearing that our prime minister said that.
Am I wrong?
I don't think that was what was said. We are very careful not to interject ourselves in American politics. Despite everything that has been said about us, this is the last thing that we would want to do. For Israel, look, you can't win on one foot. And Israel needs the support of both major American parties in order to survive the challenges that we face. Those in Congress that vote for Iron Dome and for defense cooperation with Israel are not only in one party, they're in two parties. So that we have to be very careful to maintain that objective of Israel being beyond American partisan politics, like we always were, and to be a bipartisan consensus issue in this country. And we will fight to get there, and I don't think you'll find Israeli leaders in this day and age saying, I want this guy over this guy, because that's simply not the way we're supposed to conduct ourselves.
Someone wants to know whether Israel is doing anything to help get the hostages held by Iran released. There's an American Marine, there's also a pastor, and also an aid worker. Is Israel doing anything to assist America in getting those hostages released from Iran?
Well, first of all, we are the #1 intelligence partner to the United States. And this is not my saying, but this you'll hear in Washington if you go into the intelligence committees. Both parties, by the way, if you go to the Pentagon, they will tell you that Israel and the United States are the foremost intelligence partners, certainly when it comes to anything happening in the Middle East. Now, we're watching Iran very carefully, as you can well imagine, and we have the capabilities of seeing things that many others don't. And what we see, we share with the administration. We've always done that, and we'll always do that. We see ourselves as your strongest ally in the Middle East, and we have our books open. We always did. Everything from the most minute intelligence to our concerns and our analysis of what's happening. And again, we don't always agree on that, but we still share our perspective, to the best practices, to joint training, to medical practices that the military does. You know, this high-tech bandage that is now every US soldier and every first responder has in their first aid kit is an Israeli invention. It's an Israeli invention. It's just an example of the little and large things that we do together all the time. So we share that information, and we're very concerned. We're very concerned about what Iran is doing. We're very concerned about the plight of Christians in the Middle East. There is not a community that hasn't been affected in a very negative way. From Gaza, where most of them are gone, and by the way, where do they go? They go to Israel, and they're hiding in Israel. And the Syrian Christian population, which was decimated, if not worse than that, the Iraqi, the Egyptian, everywhere you look in the Middle East, you see declining Christian communities. down to, if I'm not mistaken, 4% of the Middle East, and they used to be, Christians in the Middle East used to be a very significant minority. There were 20%, over 20%. So it's something to be very concerned about. The state of human rights in Iran. Talk to our Baha'i friends, which is a minority religion, which, by the way, also established their world headquarters in Israel. In Israel, in my hometown of Haifa, I remember when they were building their world headquarters, where the columns were going up the mountain in semi-trailers when I was a kid in the early 70s. So the minorities of Iran are suffering tremendously. So we're very, very concerned of the state of human rights in Iran, and certainly about Americans, whether they're people of faith or Washington Post journalists, that are being held in a way that is completely outrageous. All the while, these negotiations are taking place, and no one's really focusing on these things.
David, how can the typical American show his or her support for Israel?
Let me count the ways. Number one, Israel's a real country. We're 8.3 million people. 8.3 million people. Come and visit us. Come invest with us. Come innovate with us. Build a relationship with us. We are your friends and partners in the Middle East. And you know what? It didn't start now. It started with the Puritans. I mean, this country, I heard someone say something beautiful. Israel's not only the startup nation, it's a startup. Israel's a startup. Democracy in the Middle East, 1948, reviving ancient religion, bring the whole thing together, was a startup. And you know what? It's been a tremendous success. And so is America. America's a startup. It's a startup. We share the same spiritual DNA. We share the same values. We're two democracies. We value democracy. We value our Judeo-Christian heritage that brought us to where we are. Who came up with the idea of private enterprise? Who came up with the idea of private property? Who came up with the idea of philanthropy? I mean, all of this goes back to our shared roots. This is why Western societies historically were successful. This is who we are. So I would say know Israel for what it is before the headlines. It's very easy to be a headline junkie and to know who's against who and who's firing at who and so on. Israel's heroic, it's an ally, but it's also a real country. So I would say, please know us, have a relationship with us, educate your friends, educate your elected officials that we're in this together for better and for worse, and I believe for better, because in the final analysis, we are the forces of the future. Nanotechnology, brain research, medical devices, the internet, the clean energy, the conquering of the desert through water and food security and feeding the world. And you know what? Who's in Nepal right now? Who's got the largest field hospital in Nepal? We just shut it down. There was another earthquake today. We're going back. Now, the Iranians, they're sitting in their chairs and they're saying, the Israelis are in Nepal not to save lives. And by the way, 2,000 people were treated in our field hospital, including the people that were rescued by the American teams and the Israeli teams that were taken out of the ruins. They were brought to the field hospital. It was the only functioning place. That's where we had 300 medical personnel there. Life-saving surgeries, childbirth. This whole thing is happening just like we did in Japan and just like we did in the Philippines and just like we did in Haiti. And you know what the Iranians say about us? They're there because they're body snatchers. We haven't seen the Iranians saving lives in earthquakes. We see them destroying lives in man-made earthquakes in the Middle East. So this is sort of the way the game is played. So know us, know that there's a reality behind those headlines. Educate, come visit us, have a relationship with us, and tell your friends about us.
Another question from the audience, but I will warn you, David, this has to do with American politics. Why do the majority of Jews in this country continue to vote for Democrats when it's obvious that Obama and his supporters are not supportive of Israel?
Look, every ethnic community in this country has a political history and political traditions. I think there's, again, without getting into, and I represent, despite my accent, I represent the nation of Israel, and I'm very careful about talking about domestic politics in this country. But, Ronald Reagan received a very high percentage of the Jewish vote, and so did other Republican presidents. So I think, it's fluid. There are stereotypes about different communities, and I think you're seeing changes in the Jewish community as well, and I think people are very rightfully concerned. Jews today that are educated and that are following world events are concerned about the state of the Jewish community in France, the state of the Jewish communities in Europe, this Iranian business, whatever your political point of view, everyone agrees that this is a country that shouldn't be trusted. I mean, there was a survey that just came out today, or yesterday, that 3% of Americans believe that Iran will keep this agreement. 3%.
Who are they?
There you have it. So, in any event, look,
3%?
Jews in America have certain political traditions, and and the Jewish community is also in flux. It's changing. There's a growing Orthodox subcomponent in the community that has its own worldview. So I see things as very fluid, and again, we try to position Israel in a place that both parties can share, because we need both parties to support Israel, and that's as much as I can say about that one.
How can
Good
the
question.
American and the international Jewish community best help Israel in combating anti-Semitism?
By getting serious about it. It's one thing to march, and we know that people like to march, especially in Europe. You can have 3 million people marching in the streets, and then they go home. The question is, what do you do? What is the accountability? What is the price tag? What is law enforcement doing? What are the laws that you have? How open are you to really pursuing dangerous elements in your society? Part of the problem in Europe is that they're exporting thousands of jihadists to the Middle East. They're battling in all the wars, pro-ISIS, anti-ISIS, pro-Al-Qaeda, anti-Al-Qaeda, and then they go back home. And no one really knows who's coming, who's going, and that's very dangerous for the Jewish community, but for those societies themselves. You've got to know who's coming in and out of your borders. Any society should do that. So Europe has to get more serious about that challenge of anti-Semitism, but also to tackle the elites that promulgate this. It's not just the disaffected Muslim youth that may be attracted to extremist content on the internet. It's a whole environment that we talked about before, with the British attitudes and so on. So it needs to be fought. And here the United States is in a unique moral position and has traditionally done that, to take a stand and make sure that governments step up to the plate. It's very dangerous.
I have one final question for you, David. Former Prime Minister Golda Meir famously said, "This conflict will continue until Palestinian mothers love their children more than they hate Israelis." Is that still your calculation? That we're going to have this problem until Palestinian mothers love their children more than they hate Israelis?
That's absolutely the fact. That's absolutely the case. What we need is a whole education system that changes, governments that change, Palestinian leaders that don't glorify terrorism, but that teach coexistence. And by the way, there are very significant groups out there that are doing that. So I'm an optimist. Theodore Herzl said that without optimism, or if you don't believe in miracles, or to be realistic, or whatever, I'm putting that aside for a minute. It's not coming out. But you have to be an optimist in order to live in the Middle East.
I've been there.
Okay? So I'm an optimist. And I think that most people, I have Palestinian neighbors and I know them well. Most people want to live their lives. They want to have jobs. They want their kids to have a good life. They want their elderly parents to have hospital care. And this is what human beings typically want. The problem is that when you have the motivated extremists that are funded by countries like Iran, and they're funding the terrorism, and they're funding the martyrdom, and they're doing this, that could overwhelm everything. So I believe in the good nature of people, but I'm very skeptical about those that have the power and have the money in the Middle East that are very, very dangerous. And we need to fight them. And we need to realize that there's a difference and that we will win when we maintain that differentiation between common people and extremists that have to be isolated. And this will continue to do. And I believe, again, just on a positive note, and since we are at the Nixon Foundation, I want to thank the foundation, and I want to say that there's another very famous thing that Golda Meir said. And she said to President Nixon in one of their many meetings, she said, you know, my foreign minister, Abba Even, speaks better English than your Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger.
David, thank you.
Thank you.
Very entertaining, very enjoyable. Thank you.
Let's give a big round of applause. Thank you to the Consul General and Larry Elder for a terrific discussion.